what the cultural context is. All those variables will ultimately dictate the response that you get from your audience. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're sitting next to a decision maker and you present a very compelling study, and if that decision maker does not respond in the way that you're hoping, then it's not a persuasive case. And so, in order to get the desired response from your audience, I want to talk you through 6 components of a talking data toolkit. This is just a structured way of thinking about communication. Like I said, there's others. But since this is a workshop, a skills-based workshop, I want to talk about each of these to give you some possibilities as you define your own communication. So we'll go through each of these. We're going to talk about objectives, audiences, structure, connecting through content, channel choice, and then, interestingly enough, adapting your visual. There are so many useful data visualization workshops here at our conference today. One of my principal messages to you all is going through those 5 steps before the visual is actually critical to developing a visual that can actually get your audience to act on it. All right, so let's get into this. We'll talk through this, and then we'll get into our exercise. First concept here is define your objective. Now, you may say that is the simplest thing I've ever heard at this conference. But this is the fundamental question for any piece of communication. And that is, as a result of this communication, what action do you want your audience to take? As a result of this communication, what action do you want your audience to take? If you've only got 20 minutes with the decision maker, maybe just 5 minutes, maybe it's just an email. As a result of this communication, what action do you want your audience to take? And if you can be really clear on that answer, then that's going to tailor the communications that you develop. So being very clear on your objective is essential. Second point I'd like to talk about is analyzing your audiences. And this is especially true in our field, where your knowledge of analytics likely is far beyond some of the people that you deal with. So you have to take that into account. So a few questions for you to consider when you analyze your audience. What is your credibility with your audience? Your audience gives you credibility. So what is your credibility with your audience? What is your audience's familiarity with analytics concepts? If you're dealing with someone that has very light knowledge in analytics, and you present to them a box and whiskers plot, that's going to take a lot of time just to walk through how that graph works, let alone explain what the key takeaways are. What is your audience's bias towards your conclusions? For the last few years at our conference, we've been talking about how all humans are biased. So if you can understand what your audience's bias is toward what you're going to present, and then seek to address that and counteract that in your communications, you're going to be set up for more success. And then finally, if there's a key concept that I can leave you with in terms of audience analysis, asking the question, what's in it for them? What's in it for them? How can they put your solutions to use that will benefit them, their department, and their organization? So those are some audience questions to consider as you analyze the situation. Third point here I'd like to talk about is message structure. And this is about communicating with a variety of audiences within your organization that may have different profiles based on the audience analysis that you would conduct. And generally speaking, there are 2 types of structures, how you might structure your message for clarity and impact. So I read a lot of academic papers. I go to a lot of academic presentations. And typically, we see the indirect structure, right? Where the research question is discussed, the methodology is discussed, the results are discussed, the implications are discussed, and then we get to the conclusion or the bottom line. And believe me, I love my colleagues. But sometimes it takes an hour in a presentation to actually get to the one-sentence summary of what the research is about. You may have key audience stakeholders that want to go through this type of structured communication. You may have very analytical-oriented audiences that want to spend that time in an indirect structure conversation. On the other hand, you might have audiences that may prefer a different structure of communication, and this is what we would call the direct structure of the communication, where the bottom line goes up front. The bottom line goes up front. So you do the analysis, you understand what's important about it, and you can sit across from whoever you're talking to and clearly communicate the bottom line to them up front with a rationale and perhaps even a suggested call to action. Now, I'm not arguing for one of these structures over the other. I'm just suggesting that depending on your audience, how they like to process information, what their familiarity is with analytics concepts, and your conclusions, you have two choices to consider. Fourth point I wanted to mention here is connecting through content. And effective communicators have a range of options in developing communications. So there are a number of different audience appeals that can help bring to life your analytics insights. These include logos, making a very rational argument. They include pathos, an emotional appeal. Ethos, relying on your authority or the authority of your collaborators. Universal values, there may be something that your stakeholders within your organization hold near and dear as a true value. President Obama talked about that yesterday, about how values can drive the decision-making process. So how can you tap into universal values of your organization? And even personal appeals. Again, depending on your audience, these appeals can be deployed to get your message across. Social proof is another point here. What other competitors are doing in the space may help the persuasiveness of your conclusions. Rhetorical devices telling stories, metaphors, allusions, personification, repetition, and parallelism. These are all choices that you can make in your content as you flesh out your message. Fifth point here is about choosing your channel. And anyone ever heard of a slidegement? Anyone ever heard that term? It's one of my favorite terms in communication, and it's the deck that's written to be read, but it's used as a visual aid, right? Where there's bullets of information, lots of confusing graphics. And my argument to you is, in terms of effective communication for clarity and impact, thinking through 3 different types of channels for your conclusion is another choice to make. So if you're giving a presentation in this type of situation, I would argue I wouldn't be doing an effective job with lots and lots of bullets and lots of information. So my visuals are purposely, I hope, easy to read. The slidegement is sort of the deck that you would read instead of use as a visual aid, and sometimes that's helpful, right? But may not be for a presentation like this or even a smaller conference room. And then a document is a third channel choice. That's where if you have decision makers like executives at Amazon, where the first 30 minutes of every single meeting is to read a long memo about the decision at hand, then you can spend a lot of time writing out your conclusions, and so that everybody understands the rationale. The point is that, thinking about, well, are people going to view this as a presentation? Are people going to read your deck afterwards? Or are people actually going to spend the time reading your paper? That will dictate how much content you actually include in your channel. And then finally, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. As I mentioned at the top, this is my message to you about visualization. Again, there are so many amazing tools out there for visualization. We have a lot of them here at our conference. I would just submit to you that it's only after you think through your objective, your audience, the structure of your message, the content, and the channel that you arrive at the decision of, okay, what visual makes the most sense for this situation to accomplish my persuasive objective. Some things to think about. Well, does the form match your audience? Okay. I gave the example earlier of the box and whiskers plot. Does your audience understand that? If not, you're going to have to spend a lot more time explaining it. What types of accuracy measures can you take to ensure data integrity? Emphasis. I'm a big fan of the idea of one key point per slide and using your headline to make that key point very, very clear. And then finally, limiting excess. I ask this anytime I have a conversation about communicating data. Has anyone ever used 3D for a really effective presentation? Has anyone used a 3D graphic very effectively? All right, I'm still striking out on this because oftentimes 3D just doesn't add anything to your visual and is more excessive than additive. So, we talked about these concepts. In anything I teach or talk to colleagues about, I try to walk the walk as best I can. So, in all humility, I'm going to show you an example of a recent project that I worked on here with our local NBC Sports RSN. And the charge was, how can we make basketball analytics concepts more understandable to casual fans? And so we developed this 3 points concept. Again, I'm sharing this with you in all humility, but I hope it brings to life some of the concepts here, and then we can have a conversation about it. So here's someone that we'll take a look at. One is a master. The other is just beginning to understand his powers. One has guided the work of greats, while the other is starting to unlock the greatness around him. One speaks cryptically, the other talks openly. No, we're not referring to Yoda and a young Luke Skywalker. However, when these two coaches square off, it's like a battle straight out of the Forest Moon of Endor. Star Wars references, don't worry, I've got a few more. You see, legendary coach Greg Popovich is showing a young Jedi like Brad Stevens the path to greatness. And after analyzing Pop's remarkable 2-decade career, here are 3 points on the coaching force that surrounds Pop. Point 1, disciplined defense. It sounds simple, but when a defense forces an offense to miss shots, they put themselves in a position to win. Pop's defenses have consistently done just that. Remarkably, in his 19 full seasons, the Spurs have finished in the top 10 in opponent effective field goal percentage every year except for one. Point 2, unselfish offense. There's no hero ball on the Spurs offense. Everyone is involved, and the team is patient, waiting for the best shot. Since SportView started tracking passing stats in 2013, the Spurs have ranked in the top 5 in passes made, an indicator of the team's commitment to ball movement. And finally, point 3, adaptability. You see, as the game has evolved from inside out, Pop set aside his hatred for the three-pointer and embraced the shot to great effect. In the last 6 seasons, the Spurs have led the league in three-point percentage 3 times. So does Brad Stevens have the makings of a Jedi Master from the sidelines? Well, in his first 3 seasons, we've seen his teams exhibit disciplined defense, unselfish offense, and the ability to adapt. So the more we talk, the more that clipboard of his is starting to look like a lightsaber. So tonight, anytime you see a Celtics defensive stand, an extra pass leading to a hoop, or one of those after timeout plays that are from a different galaxy, use the hashtag #StevensMindTrick, and let's see if Brad can fulfill his destiny of beating Greg Popovich. So if you've got a bad feeling about the Celtics matchup against the Spurs, just remember, disciplined defense plus unselfish offense plus adaptability equals Stevens' mind trick. And may the force be with you, Boston. All right. So I'll give you a sense of what I was thinking about when we developed that content, and then we can get into a quick discussion about what you liked and what you didn't like, all in the spirit of trying to walk the walk. So I had a specific objective. I was trying to motivate our viewers to use that hashtag throughout the game. I had an audience that had very basic understanding of analytics concepts and was trying to bring them to light so that they actually had this new vocabulary to analyze the game. I used a direct structure to basically make the argument as to why Popovich was such a successful coach, and I had 3 points to support that argument. I connected through content. It was the week that the latest Star Wars movie came out, so we tried to be contextually relevant and use that story to tie in to the argument that we were making. The visuals were purposely designed for the TV medium. So the Star Wars theme music and opening credits was one, I think, more elaborate visual, but the other 2 were pretty simple and I hope easy for the audience to process. And in the end, I think that we tried to get people to use the hashtag throughout the game. So what struck you about this particular video? Anything work for you or anything didn't work for you? I'm curious. Especially as we talk about all of these concepts of strategic communication applied to a specific example. And then we'll give you an opportunity to apply them to your own work as well. So anything struck you? Please.
Based on your target audience, didn't overwhelm you?
Well, I think that's an important point. You know, what is your audience's appetite for numbers and analytics concepts? And we tried to strike that right balance there. Go ahead. Yeah. So I'm a big believer in repetition in communication, and this is not my line, but I find it very useful. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you just told them. I practice this with my students all the time because getting them to act on what we're trying to do is obviously our key objective. Yes, please.
I know we touched on content itself, but I think the style in which you presented the content was important. I was engaged and it was entertaining. You could have someone up there that doesn't know how to present the content itself, and it's not the same. That same kind of impact. So.
Yeah, I mean, there are verbal and nonverbal strategies that you can use to maintain audience interest, and we tried to use some vocal variety here. Anything that didn't work for you? Anything that didn't work for you? I have a thick skin. I take feedback all the time. Anything you didn't like? Please. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so we took a risk, right? And saying, you know, maybe we're tying into a popular conversation, but if we have Star Wars, I don't want to call you a hater, but if we have Star Wars haters out there, then we'll get them to tune out immediately. Yes, Shane.
Being first in the league, 3-point percentage, not really full adoption of
Yeah.
love for 3-point shot.
Yeah.
You said your top 5 attempts
Yeah.
as a rocket star,
Yeah.
more evidence of that ability. So I saw that, I said, well, that's not really
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. Yeah, so thank you. I think, well, a lot. So my response to that would be, okay, my producers were like, okay, we have a short amount of time. So what choices do we make, right? I would love to be able to, all of us would love to be able to go into the context behind the numbers that we are sharing. And so that's an obvious miss. And I think that speaks to the broader time constraints that we face. And so you have to make choices. I missed on that one. And that's the reality of trying to communicate a message in a short amount of time. So thank you for that. Other points that either you liked or didn't like? Yeah.
I guess I'm kind of mixed on the sort of appeal to authority of being the professor in the classroom,
Yeah.
teaching everyone.
Yeah.
I see some good and some.
Right.
I just don't have full opinion.
Yeah, so setting, right? So setting of the communication. So we made the decision. So no one was in the classroom. I'm kind of looking back at this, and I'm like, would have been good if we had at least some extras there. I would have felt less awkward, right? But yeah, so the setting influences how the message is relayed, right? We sort of relate it to the cultural point too. And I'm glad you're thinking through that. Other points, yes?
I mean, I thought for the medium that you were in, for what you were doing, trying to communicate to the audience, I thought that was all very appropriate. From my perspective, as somebody who I'm directing digital analytics platforms for a smart race,
Yeah.
and I'm sitting in a meeting with a bunch of digital marketers and different like levels of ability, and I would look at that and I would go, that is still too complicated.
Yeah.
And it would make me feel like if I provided that or something along those lines, it would waste time. I
Yeah.
would probably just boil it down to
Yeah.
a couple of charts,
Yeah.
a few bullet points, and say this is the thing. And,
Yeah.
and I guess it kind of almost makes the data feel like there is a problem.
Yeah. So I.
With all respect, no, I think this was great for
Yes.
TV. I think this was great for TV. I think this is great for basketball
Yeah.
analytics.
Yeah.
I'm kind of in the trenches every day,
Yeah.
doing this stuff, working with people, and
Yeah.
I think,
No qualification necessary. That's why we're having this conversation, okay? But you bring up a couple interesting points, okay? Number one, your ability to synthesize. Yeah. If I had another shot at this, I'd probably want to maybe do it in 60 seconds potentially, right? So your ability to synthesize the most important points for your audience. And that's a tough skill. That's a really tough skill. To the conversation we were having with Shane, potentially that means you leave out some context or get some things wrong, right? And so that's always a trade-off. So I love that comment because I think it will transition us nicely into a little bit of an exercise. And again, this is a workshop room. We designed this workshop to be interactive. So I wanted to get into a little bit of an exercise with us all here and just see if we can play with some of these concepts. And I'll tell you, when I was thinking about what would be most useful for our time together, I wanted to emphasize this notion of message structure. Because to the point of limited time, to the point of making choices on the information that you're going to share, using a structured approach to developing your messages can often be helpful to designing clear communications. So all of you here are either working on an analytics project of some sort today, or maybe you have an idea of something that you'd like to do in the future. Let's just sort of take whatever you're working on today and use it. And if you don't have one, you could even think about the Warriors piece that we talked about earlier and go in different directions from there. And I would like you to work on developing a structured 90-second pitch. A structured 90-second pitch. And as a result of your pitch, think about what action do you want your audience to take. Here are 4 questions to help guide the structure of this pitch. I'm not suggesting this is the only structure for any pitch, okay? But let's just use this as a way to sort of structure your thinking. What organizational problem are you addressing? What is your solution to this problem? What's in it for them, i.e., your audience? And think about the call to action. How can your audience act on your solution? Okay? So I want you to work with your neighbor to answer these questions and also balance time. You got 90 seconds to make this pitch, talking about what the problem is, what the solution is, what the benefits are, and what the call to action should be. Work with your neighbor. I'm going to give you about 10 to 15 minutes. We'll see how you're doing. And then we'll call a few people up here to share their pitch for a little bit of feedback. Sound okay? All right, so let's get to work.